Recently, we had a horrible tragedy with Flight 9525 of Germanwings crashing in the Alps, and they were trying to figure out what in the world happened because there was no distress call. They did not lose pressure in the cabin. There was no mid-air explosion. And it looks like we finally have our answer, and the answer is a deeply disturbing one that creates a whole nother mystery. It turns out a 28-year-old co-pilot by the name of Andreas Lubitz wound up locking out the other pilot from the cockpit, closed the doors down, and then directed the plane straight into the ground. For 8 terrifying minutes, they descend and eventually hit the ground, and all 150 people on board die. And now I'm going to give you some details on this story, but understand that among all the people killed, about half of them were Germans, and then the rest from all over the world, including 3 Americans, a lot of Spaniards. There were 16 10th graders and their 2 teachers on the plane as well, and they all perished. It must have been unbelievable in those last 8 minutes. The terror and the fright is unimaginable. So Bryce Robin, who's a prosecutor in Marseille, had this to say about what happened. He said, "This was voluntary. This was deliberate. He refused to open the cabin door in order to let the pilot back in. I repeat, he refused to let the pilot back in. He's the one who pressed the button that allowed the plane to begin descending and lose altitude." So because they've recovered a black box, they can tell he's not saying anything in there. You hear banging on the door, and it's obvious that the main pilot, who had a tremendous amount of experience, 6,300 hours of flight experience, is trying to get back in. He won't let him back in, and it's obvious that he directed the plane to head right into the ground. So the co-pilot did it. Nobody knows why he did it, but it's clear from the evidence that he did. Robin goes on to explain, again, no distress signal, 0, no help me or SOS. Nothing of this sort was received by air traffic control. So it's not like Lubitz lost control of the flight. He actually purposely pointed it down and didn't ask for any help. On the tape, we start hearing banging, someone actually trying to break the door down. That's why the alarms were let off, because these were protocols that were put in place in case of any terror attack. Now, here's the irony of this. Because of the terror attacks, they made the cockpit doors so that they could be closed, locked from the inside. So now there's a code that the crew has to open the door, but even that code can be overridden if the pilots inside the cockpit lock it out for good. So the main pilot has the code, he enters the code, but the override is from inside the cockpit from his co-pilot. This is an unbelievable mystery because they have the recordings of earlier in the flight. Everything is congenial. There's nothing out of the ordinary. They're having normal professional conversations. The pilot gets up out of the cockpit once they're up in the air and steadied, presumably to go to the restroom or whatever he had to do, tries to get back in, and that's when he's locked out, and that's when they start diving. No one has any idea why this guy did it. He has no connection to terrorist groups. Relatively recent pilot, trained back in 2008, 2009, eventually started flying for these guys in the year 2013. It's pretty recent. He's only got about 630 hours of flight experience, but no one's experienced any trouble from him before or heard of any trouble from him before. He's approved by the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration, and in the end they say he passed all medical tests, he passed all aviation tests, he passed all checks. He was 100% able to fly without any limitations, without any reservations. His accomplishments were excellent. Nothing was noticed that wasn't proper. I mean, if ever there was a situation where it appears nothing could have been done, it looks like it's this one. I mean, no profiling would have caught this guy. He didn't show any reaction in his actions that led anyone to believe that he might do anything along these lines. Nothing in his history. Amazing. And you can't call it a suicide because he took 150 people with him. No, that's and the authorities refuse to call it a suicide. So at this point, it is unclear as to why he did it, but the tragedy is very clear. Those poor 150 people, I mean, they obviously have passed away, and the way that they passed away is about as horrific as you could imagine.